The note that was left was correct. It said there was no money left.
There isn't a magic money tree.
There is no such thing as a magic money tree. This is taxpayers' money. There is no government money.
There's no such thing as a magic money tree.
There is no magic money tree.
There's no magic money tree.
But there isn't a magic money tree that we can shake that suddenly provides for everything that people want.
Every time the public asks for something essential, politicians reach for the same script. We can't afford it. There's no money left. Tough choices are needed. There's no magic money tree. The wording changes, but the message stays the same. The government needs your money. It needs the money first. It has to raise it, take it through taxes before anything can happen. And that's because the story sounds like common sense. You know, when you hear it, it becomes one of the most powerful political ideas in the country, probably in the world. But what happens if that story is wrong? What happens if the sequence people are taught is not how the system actually works? This episode is about investigating one of the biggest myths at the heart of economics. I'm going to try to not do it with any slogans or spin, just with the sequence of what happens. The question is, what comes first, spending or taxation? George initialised, this is the truth of taxation and spending. This is going to be a big one. Let's get to it.
It's good to be back, Nathan.
Hey, yeah, good to be back, George. Yeah, I think this is a big one today. So we want to take on quite a big question. We've talked about how the £1.2 trillion question episode answers some of the benefit and negatives of a deficit. Now, the biggest frame in politics I can think of is that there's no such thing as public money. There is only your money. And when I mean your money, I mean the taxpayers' money. The question is could be the biggest myth in economics, or is also probably the one that's used to defend government spending. Like, we just don't have the money. We got to raise taxes. Seems like a reasonable assumption, you know, from an economics perspective. You know, we think about how we pay for things, yeah?
Well, let's just say there is a big awakening coming, if that's your framing too.
All right, well, hold up, because we have talked about the sovereign nations, you know, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to dig in deep. We often made it feel, and let me set the scene, like the government needs money first. It has to raise it, has to find spending, you know, it borrows from the bond markets. Taxpayers' money is what fuels everything the government creates and spends and invests on. That's the assumption. The question is, like, does that stand up to like actual accounting and economic transparency? You know, is that something we can scrutinize? You know, is that true?
No, not in the sense used in politics. That story only works if you imagine the state as if it were a household or a business, which it is not. The state operates through a different legal and monetary architecture. It is the creator of currency money, so it has completely different powers to ordinary people when approaching budgeting and spending.
Yeah, so this is where I want to get to the crux of the argument, and this is our pressure point. If the government wants to create, let's get it right. If it wants to start spending, what comes first? Where does the payments actually enter the economy and exit? You know, surely this is where we can confront the actual reality of like the account structure, you know, within the government system. What is the flow of money creation? You know, what is it actually? I want to jump straight into this. Run our system check. How does government actually source its spending in the economy?
System check initiated. Subject: state spending sequence. Claim under review. The government needs the money first. The strongest operational evidence suggests that UK government spending is not best understood as tax money being collected into a pot and then handed back out. It is better understood as authorised payments being executed through the Exchequer and Bank of England machinery, using the state's own monetary infrastructure. Parliament approves spending. The Treasury manages departmental limits and release. A credit is granted through the Exchequer and Consolidated Fund framework and extended into the government banking system. Balances are then drawn into the state's settlement pathway at the Bank of England. From there, payments are settled through the central monetary system into commercial bank accounts. It moves as an authorised state payment through the Exchequer system. This is the state initiating expenditure through its own monetary architecture. Government spending enters the economy when those public balances at the Bank of England are used to settle payments into the wider banking system, reaching households, firms and institutions through private bank accounts. Parliament, Treasury, Exchequer credit, government banking route, Bank of England settlement, private bank accounts. That is the first break in the myth. It moves through authorised credit, Exchequer control and central bank settlement. Now identify the point of entry. The recipient's commercial bank account is credited. That is the moment state spending appears in the economy. If the government is paying an NHS nurse, a pensioner, a school supplier, a defence contractor, or a road builder, the result is the same. Their commercial bank account is credited. Barclays, Lloyds, NatWest, HSBC, whatever bank they use, the number in their account goes up. So the visible entry point of public spending is account credit. That is where spending becomes real for the private economy. The Exchequer and Audit Departments Act 1866 sets out the credit and issue mechanism through which HM Treasury orders issues from the Exchequer structure after parliamentary authority has been granted. The deeper institutional reading is this: public spending is not waiting on a household-style tax pot. It proceeds through authorised issue and settlement first, with balancing and cash management handled afterward. That is why the household analogy fails. The public sees a tax pot. The state operates through a sovereign accounting structure. System override? The phrase "the government must raise the money first" is not an operational description of UK public spending. It is a political simplification. The first visible point in the real sequence is spending. The state does not spend like a household. It spends through authorised credit and central bank settlement, while the public is taught a story about tax pots and financial scarcity.
Okay, yeah, that was quite a lot. So what you're saying is between sort of the government banking services and like the Treasury, the spending is already issued throughout the banking sector. So that's sort of meaning that the limitations themselves aren't within a tax pot sat within the government system. They're managing expenses through the Bank of England to settle payments. That's what you're really saying. And that seems quite huge if they're using the defence that there is no money, because their role in partnership with the central bank allows them to make payments. There's not a pot of cash that's running out of money per se.
Yes. Because once the order is clearer, the debate changes. The question is no longer simply, where will the money come from? Or can we afford it? The deeper questions become, do we have the productive capacity? What inflationary pressures might follow? That is a very different conversation from a slogan about affordability, as the limits applied to them via empty accounts.
Yeah, the idea is there's not empty accounts, it's about other factors in the economy. Yeah. So if that's the order, you know, what happens to the money we sort of pay within taxation itself? If it's not, because I get lost on this. If the state's not spending taxpayers' money in the simple way we imagine, then what is actually tax like doing with inside the system, if that makes sense?
System correction. Taxation is not the source pot. It is the drain. State spending introduces money into circulation. Taxation removes money back out. That is one of its core functions. It helps regulate demand, reduce private purchasing power, and maintain the monetary structure. It also shapes who keeps more or less buying power in the economy. So tax still matters enormously. It just does not appear to fund spending in the simplistic political sense usually presented.
Yeah. I mean, in plain English, it's the fact that we've not got a supply constraint, and you're saying taxation is a removal tool for money within the economy. Yeah, it's quite weird, because I always think of taxation as the supply which we use, for paying for stuff. Yeah, that's quite mad. I need to sort of see this actually in operation. How does tax actually operate within the system then? Run our system simulation.
System simulation initialized. Scope. Tax comes in. Government holds the money, spending comes out afterward. Variable: public assumption versus system architecture. Stage 1: the public assumption. Officially, tax revenue goes into the consolidated fund and departmental supplies authorised from it. But that same official structure also shows the consolidated fund being balanced with the National Loans Fund. So even at the formal level, this is not a neat standalone pot of tax money waiting to be respent. Simulation finding: the public story says there is one pot. The official structure already shows a wider balancing architecture. That means the tax in, spend out story is incomplete before we even reach the operational layer. Stage 2: the tax route is not the spending route. Now observe the route. Tax does not appear to travel through the same operational channel as spending. The tax route begins with households and firms. It then moves through Barclays collection accounts and other commercial collection channels. From there, it moves into HMRC accounts at the Bank of England. It is then recorded into the Consolidated Fund. After that, it is folded into Exchequer Sweep and National Loans Fund balancing. The spending route is different. It begins with parliamentary authority, then comes Treasury requisition, then Exchequer credit and issue, then the Government Banking Service and Paymaster General route, then Bank of England settlement, and finally private bank accounts are credited. That distinction matters. Separate routes detected. Tax collection is not the same as spending settlement. Stage 3: the structural result. Now the key question: does a deposit of tax revenue furnish the balance later used for spending? System answer: no clear evidence of that sequence has been found. The strongest institutional reading is the opposite. In fact, the literature states there is never a situation whereby a deposit of tax revenue furnishes a balance that is subsequently used for spending. That is the critical structural break in the public story. Simulation verdict: tax legally enters the consolidated fund. But tax does not appear to be the balance that does the paying. State spending can be authorised and settled first through the Exchequer and Bank of England system. Tax then arrives later through a separate route and is folded into the balancing of the Exchequer afterward. From the private side of the system, taxation appears to reduce balances and help neutralise the monetary effects of spending after the payment has already happened. Critical threat: tax is not the spark that starts state spending. It appears as part of the process that drains, offsets and balances the system afterward. There is never a situation whereby a deposit of tax revenue furnishes a balance subsequently used for spending.
Wow, I mean that's huge, really. When I think that the taxpayers' money doesn't actually, furnish the money that's used for spending, it feels like quite a huge, it's a huge political implication on that. So if that's not how the sort of system works, why are people still told the opposite? Why did it still go back to that political statement? Where will the money come from? Taxpayers can't afford it. We need the money first.
Because the false version is politically useful. If the public believes spending depends on tax receipts in the household sense, then every question of public investment can be framed as a question of scarcity. That shifts debate away from the real economic questions.
Yeah, the real economical questions which we're trying to get to. We saw with the clips at the start, with the opening scene, all the language, and it all comes in the same, frame, doesn't it? Like the country's broke, there isn't the money, the government has to hold back on spending. I remember austerity, George Osborne and the Conservatives, and there's still similar language with the Labour, government. But I remember the whole idea, we had to live within our means, there's no money left and there had to be cuts, So if that's the sequence and it looks like what we're being told is really a lie, that story is really pushed hard,
Because the danger of the myth is not just that it reverses the sequence, it makes the public argue about scarcity in the wrong place.
Yeah, arguing about the wrong things is like the whole political landscape of media at the moment. I think if taxation isn't the fuel and the economy isn't working the way we're told, then, you know, if spending can be authorised and settled through the state system, then obviously there's much more complicated, you know, setup than people are being told. You know, what does that mean?
It is, because an economy can only absorb so much spending before inflation and resource pressure become real constraints. But the deeper point remains the same. Money is a claim on resources. So the real question is not just how much money exists, it is where it lands.
Okay, yeah, so you're sort of bringing it back to like what we discussed with the commercial banks. It comes down to allocation within the economy, you know, location, who gets access, who gets claims on the resources, you know. So what's the simplest way to like conclude this, really? You know, there's a few things bobbing around in my mind.
Think about when the phrase, "there's no money" disappears. War, bank bailouts, COVID. In those moments, money moves very quickly. Why? Because the state and the Bank of England can operate together when there is political will to mobilise the economy. So the real limit is not a household-style lack of money. It is the combination of political choice, real resource capacity, and inflation risk.
Yeah, that's the big point. The big point is how much money actually gets mobilised in those situations, isn't it? Because that shows like an example of contradiction. Yeah, that's where it gets real. So with like war, you know, bailouts, everyone remembers COVID, you know, money just appeared. Yeah, what was those sort of numbers actually, since we're on that topic?
During the Second World War, UK public spending rose into the tens of billions of pounds in nominal terms, reaching around £14 billion a year by 1945. During the 2008 banking crisis, UK support for the banking system peaked at around £1 trillion, including roughly £1 trillion in guarantees and £133 billion in direct cash outlay. During COVID, government support for the economy reached around £407 billion.
Right, so when when the state decides something matters, you know, the monies can move quite fast. Yeah.
Exactly. The issue is not whether money can move. The issue is what the state chooses to mobilise the economy for.
Yeah, it's a lot to sort of digest today, you know, especially the political implications. You know, got to keep a lookout in the media, and even the economical budgets, you know, because these phrases are used all the time. I think this is a huge one, really. I'm definitely going to dig into this further in the reflection episode, I think, you know, because we've got lots of references that I'm sure you've pulled. But I'm definitely interested to see more about the central banks. And that moves us to the sort of the next big episode, who controls money and the role of the central banks. This is going to be a big one. Hope you're ready for it. I look forward to seeing everyone in the next one.